All right, a little quick test here. And we're good. Alrighty, so if you haven't noticed, these are live streams, so don't expect any top production value, but it'll get the job done. So welcome to my Legends League. What we'll be doing in this one is just going through all the rosters. If you've played NHL 20 or looked into it before, you've probably seen that they do have alumni teams for every team included this year. And if you've been able to go through those rosters, you've probably also noticed that there's a decent amount of players missing. A decent amount of big name players that deserve to be on any team, even some big time Legends teams all time that didn't make it, just for licensing issues and stuff like that. And also some players who maybe were on certain teams that you didn't really understand why. One of the first ones that came to mind for me was seeing Owen Nolan, I believe, was on the Minnesota Wild. And yeah, he played there, but his career was basically long done past that point. He'd already had his time with the Sharks, flamed out with the Leafs, and sort of tried to revive itself. And this had him on their alumni team, sort of at his peak, and that didn't seem right either. So what I've done here is I've created some players that I felt were missing, put them on, and we've sort of streamlined the process for teams. So if you played for multiple teams, you're not going to be on every team that you played for, only the ones that you spent a significant amount of time for. So that's sort of how I prioritized it, by games played and by points, especially if you're a forward. If you're a goalie, games played and wins. If you're a defenseman, it's mostly just games played, because it's sort of hard to find a stat that'll really back that up. I can't go by points, because then you'll leave out a lot of really good defensive defensemen. So I've sort of mostly just relied on games played in that one. And by games played, I mean games played with that one specific team. I went each team and looked up their franchise leaders in games played and was able to build my rosters from there. So with those little caveats out of the way, let's get started on the reveal. Starting off, we'll go in just the quick alphabetical here. Starting off with the Anaheim Ducks. And as I go through each team, I'll give a brief little overview of them, just sort of their history. And I'm not going to talk about the history of the whole team, but just, give you an idea of how long they've been around, how many Stanley Cups they've won, just to maybe give you an idea going in what shot they have in this 31-team league. So the Anaheim Ducks, established for the 1993-94 season, one Stanley Cup to their name. We'll take a look at their roster here. We'll have Adam Oates centering Paul Kariya and the franchise points leader Teemu Selanne. Ryan Getzlaff with Bobby Ryan and Corey Perry. Andy McDonald with Chris Kunitz and Jakob Silfverberg. Steve Ruchin with Mike Leclerc and Ricard Raquel. So what I've sort of done here, I haven't just best lines these lines. I've tried to give them some sort of logic as well, and try to keep players of a similar era who maybe played together on certain lines. Maybe they didn't play on a line together when they were on the team. If they did, I've tried to keep that together. But if they were on the same team together, I've tried to make that happen too. So Kariya and Selanne, they're my top line. You've got this Ryan Getzlaff Perry line, sort of talks about that, keeps that era, and the bottom six is a little bit more of a mismatch. I am keeping some logic as to what will work better in the games as well, so that sort of worked out there. So we'll take a look at the defense. Scott Niedermayer and Chris Pronger. Hampus Lindholm and Ruslan Saleh. Francois Beauchemin and Cam Fowler round off the defense for the Ducks. Starting goaltender Jean-Sébastien Giguère with his backup Guy Hebert. There's a couple different options for backup goalie here for Anaheim. John Gibson, Freddie Anderson immediately come to mind. A lot of times, if I have a tie to break, I'll sort of go to the player who's not a current player. I have current players included on a decent amount of these teams. Just about every one, I think. Except for more of the longer established teams. I think the Habs don't have a current player on their team. But tie sort of goes to the veteran. And with the goaltenders specifically, I've really tried to keep it. One, if you're a goaltender who played for multiple teams, you're probably only going to be on one team here. We'll see that a little bit later as well. As we'll move on to the Arizona Coyotes, which they do need a little bit of explaining as well. The Winnipeg Jets will be coming up later. The Winnipeg Jets, of course, relocated from Winnipeg to Phoenix and became the Coyotes. So that would sort of leave me with 2 Jets teams and not really knowing much to do with there. Do I put a legend like Dale Hawerchuk, who only played for the Jets before they moved to Phoenix, on Arizona, or do I keep him from Winnipeg? I decided to put those Jets in Winnipeg. So the Arizona Coyotes team will only be from 96-97 onwards under the Coyotes, Phoenix/Arizona. And then the Jets later on, it'll be that earlier era of the Jets in the NHL, and then when they returned back from Atlanta. Speaking of Atlanta, we'll get to them later as well. But first off, the Arizona Coyotes. We'll start from the net this time. It'll be Sean Burke with backup Mike Smith. At the front end here, Jeremy Roenick centering Keith Tkachuk and Shane Doan, their franchise points leader. Daniel Briere with Ladislav Nagy and Mike Johnson. Martin Hansel with Radim Verbata and Michael Bodker. Michael Handzus with Chris King and Dallas Drake. On defense, Oliver Ekman-Larsson, Timo Numminen, Keith Yandel and Zebnik McCulloch, Adrian O'Coin, and Derek Morris. We'll move on here to the first of our original 6 teams, dating back to the 1924-25 season, 6 Stanley Cups to their name. The only team out of all of these whose franchise points leader will not be a forward. We'll start off here with Phil Esposito centering Milt Schmidt and Ken Hodge Sr. Adam Oates finds his second alumni team here with Johnny Busick and Cam Neely. Joe Thornton centering Brad Marchand and Rick Middleton. Patrice Bergeron with Wayne Cashman and Terry O'Reilly. Defense, I think this is probably the best D-core of any of these teams. It's Bobby Orr and Eddie Shore, Raymond Bourque and Brad Park, Zdeno Chara, and Dit Clapper. We'll head to the nets here. It'll be Tuukka Rask getting the start ahead of Gary Cheevers. Maybe not a popular pick here. I've gone with Rask over Cheevers. Rask, the more modern goaltender, his numbers look better. You could argue that Cheevers' numbers were probably better in context just because he played in a higher scoring era. That's very valid and true. I've gone with Rask, and you may see that come up a couple times too. Cheevers was in this game, and I believe this was the overall that was given to him. I have adjusted a lot of the overalls. I'll get into how I did that at the end of the video if you want to pay attention to that. Otherwise, we'll just mow through the rosters here. But that's what's going up here. Moving on now to the Buffalo Sabres. No Stanley Cups to their name, but they've been around since 1970-71 season. So they'll have a decently stacked roster here. Starting from the net, arguably one of the best goaltenders of all time, Dominik Hasek. I think he could claim to be the best as well, with his backup, Ryan Miller. To the front line here, I've kept a big line together, the French Connection line. It'll be Gilbert Perreault with Rick Martin and René Robert. Pat LaFontaine with Thomas Vanek and Danny Gare. Jack Eichel with Dave Andrechuk and Jason Pominville. Michael Pekka with Craig Ramsey and Mike Foligno. On defense, Phil Housley with Brian Campbell, Alexei Zhitnik with Mike Ramsey, and William Hage. I'm going to go with Hage. I haven't heard how this is pronounced, so that could be horribly wrong. And Tyler Myers. Not the best look on D for the Sabres. That'll sort of probably be where their downfall lies, but they do have Dominik Hasek in the net to make up for it, and I've got him rated 99 here, so they'll have a pretty decent shot. They'll be in the stacked Atlantic Division. We'll see why they're stacked already. We've already seen the Bruins. We're going to see 3 other original 6 teams just in that division, so they're going to have a tough road ahead of them, but they've got some talent up front. I wouldn't be too surprised to see them try to sneak into a wild card spot. We'll move on here to the Carolina Hurricanes. Hurricanes, another team that switched names with a decent history in their old city as well, the Hartford Whalers. So I have included some Hartford players here. If you're more knowledgeable than I am in Hartford, you'll probably have you'll probably notice some misses here, since they are the Carolina Hurricanes in the game, and that's where a lot of the branding will be done. If I've had a choice to make, I've probably picked the Hurricane. We'll see that a little later on. Also, with the Colorado Avalanche, who were the Quebec Nordiques, there are Nordiques on the Colorado team. It just felt strange to have them mixed in with everybody, so I've limited it. I'm less sort of forced to include them. So we'll see that here with the Hurricanes. Player who played for both Hartford and Carolina is their franchise points leader, the top center, Ron Francis with Ray Whitney and Jeff O'Neill. Eric Stahl with Jeff Skinner and Justin Williams. Rod Brindamore with Gary Roberts and Eric Cole. Jordan Stahl with Jeff Sanderson and Kevin Dineen. On defense, Glenn Wesley with Justin Falk. Dave Babbage, Mike Commodore. Ron Hainsey, and Sean Hill. As we'll head to the net, just like the modern day Hurricanes, goaltending gonna be a problem for them. They've got the one Stanley Cup to their name, won by the rookie Cam Ward. He'll actually get beat out for the starting position here by Archer Zerbe. And you'll notice their overalls, I believe, will definitely be the lowest, especially of the starters. And there's a lot of backups that we'll see through a lot of teams that could very easily be this team's starter. Not a lot of goaltending to speak of here. They have been struggling with that as a franchise for a while, so it's reflected here. I gave Irbe just the slight nod over Ward. How I sort of weighted the goaltenders, these are both goaltenders that I had to create. Save percentage I used a little bit, but that's hard to do era to era. So I've really just mostly gone with goaltending awards. So if you got voted for a Vezina, if you got voted for a Hart especially, that gave you a big boost. And these ones didn't really get a whole lot that way. How I put Irbe over Ward, in my brain, Ward's career after winning the Stanley Cup, not that great. Irbe had a pretty decent stretch, never really the best goalie in the league, but always solid. I've given him the nod just a little bit because of that. As we'll move on here to first of our big-time underdog teams. Only getting their start as a franchise for the 2000-2001 season, the Columbus Blue Jackets. Sergei Bobrovsky will get the start for them. He just left the team in free agency, but we're dragging him back, kicking and screaming. He'll have Matthew Gaudon as his backup. As we'll take a look at the forward lines here. Ryan Johansson with the franchise leader Rick Nash and Cam Atkinson. Derek Brassari with Nick Foligno and Nikolai Zherdev. Brandon Dubinsky, RJ Umberger, and David Viborny. Boone Jenner, Matt Calvert, and Chris Clark. On defense, for the Blue Jackets, Ryan Murray with Seth Jones, Fedor Tutin, David Savard, Rostislav Kessler, and Jack Johnson. Now for the Calgary Flames, dating back to 1972-73, when they started off in Atlanta, they've got one Stanley Cup to their name. We'll take a look at their roster here. Kent Nielsen with Johnny Gaudreau and Theo Fleury. Joe Nieuwendyk with Joe Mullen and the franchise points leader Jerome McGinley. Doug Gilmour, Hakan Lube, and Lanny McDonald. Michael Backlund, Gary Roberts, and Joel Otto. On defense, Mark Giordano with Al McInnes. Phil Housley with Gary Suter. Robin Regier with Paul Reinhart. And in the net, Mika Kiprasov gets the start over Mike Vernon. Now, we saw what happened in Carolina. Two goaltenders similar in overall. These two as well, but they're quite a bit higher than those ones. I've got auto rotate goalies on for the sim, so we'll see both goaltenders get some playing time. What I'm hoping will happen is with these guys who are two legitimate starters, that they'll get more rotation through, and they'll both get a decent amount of starts. I got Kiprasov in the starter slot here. I'm hoping Vernon will get a decent amount of starts as well. We'll head now to another Original Six team, the only one in the West. They may be able to dominate over there because of that. It'll be the Chicago Blackhawks, dating back to 1926-27. 6 Stanley Cups to their name. Will start from the net out. Glenn Hall with Tony Esposito. Stan Mikita and Bobby Hull have Steve Larmer with them. Jonathan Taves and Patrick Kane are playing with Steve Thomas. Denny Savard with Eric Daze and Tony Amante. Jeremy Roenick, Dennis Hall, and Bob Probert. On defense, Pierre Pilote and Chris Chelios. Duncan Keith with Brent Seabrook. Doug Wilson and Bob Murray. I think this team's probably the first example where you can really see the era split in them. You've got the Taves, Kane, Seabrook, Keith era, and more of the Mikita Hall eras kind of all blending in here with a little help. They got their Stanley Cup winning teams really having an impact, and the good players that played in the middle when the Blackhawks weren't really so great. As we'll move forward here to the Quebec Nordique Colorado Avalanche team. 2 Stanley Cups to their franchise's name dating back to 79-80. Moving, of course, to Colorado, I believe, for the 95-96 season, if I remember correctly. As we'll drop in here, the big top line of Peter Forsberg, Alex Tanguay, and Milan Hajduk. Our Nordiques line of Sakic, Michel Goulet, and Peter Stastny. Nathan McKinnon with Gabriel Landeskog and Valerie Kamensky. Matt Duchene with Adam Deadmarsh and Claude Lemieux. On defense, you'll notice, especially if you're an Avs fan, who was watching around the early 2000s, you'll notice a big miss here. The great story that was Raymond Bourque finally getting his Stanley Cup after leaving Boston, I've decided not to include him on the Colorado team for the simple reason that he only played 2 years there, and they were at the end of his career. He got the Stanley Cup win, but he's got so much more time put into Boston. I didn't feel it was right to have him on both teams. So no Bork for Colorado, but we'll take a look at who's there. Sandis Ozilic with Rob Blake, John Michael Lyles with Adam Foote, Curtis Leschyshyn, and Eric Johnson. And back to the net. It'll be Patrick Waugh with his backup, Semyon Varlamov. Big discrepancy here between Waugh and Varlamov. No surprise of Patrick Waugh getting the start. I did mention earlier that I'm trying to keep goaltenders to one team, so Patrick Waugh on this Colorado team will mean he will not be on the Montreal Canadiens. There's only one goaltender who will be the starter for two teams, and it's because he was the franchise leader in games played and wins for both of those teams. Waugh doesn't qualify as that for the Habs, so I've kept them off the team. But don't worry for the Habs. Of course, they've got some great goaltenders to fall back on anyway. As we move on now to the Dallas Stars, originally the Minnesota North Stars, dating back to the original expansion in 67-68, one Stanley Cup to their name. Here they come, their goaltenders, Eddie Belfour and Marty Turco. To the front, a couple modern stars here, Tyler Seguin and Jamie Benn, with one of the greatest goal scorers of all time, Brett Hull. A Minnesota North Stars line here, Mike Modano with Brian Bellows and Dino Ciccarelli. Joe Nieuwendyk with Brendan Morrow and Jamie Langenbrunner. Neil Broughton, Bill Goldsworthy, and Jari Lehtinen. On defense, it'll be Darian Hatcher and John Klingberg, Daryl Sodor and Sergei Zubov, Richard Matvichuk and Trevor Daley. Moving on now to the team I think is probably the best team on paper going into this season. The original six teams obviously going to have an advantage with all their history and all the cup wins and some great players. I think Detroit may be the best of them all. We'll see another team later on, the Habs, that I think could be in their same realm, but I think Detroit, just looking at them on paper, has the best shot of doing amazingly well through the regular season. The playoffs are always the playoffs, but the Detroit Red Wings, I think, will be the favorites going in. We'll take a look at their team here. Starting off with the production line, Sid Abel with Ted Lindsay and Gordie Howe. Some newer stars here from the late 90s, early 2000s, Steve Yzerman with Sergei Fedorov and Brendan Shanahan. Pavel Datsuk and Henrik Zetterberg follow them up with the center who replaced Sid Abel in the production line, Alex Delvecchio. Igor Larionov, Thomas Holmstrom, and Darren McCarty round out their forwards. Some big boys on defense as well, Nicholas Lidstrom with Chris Chelios, Red Kelly with Larry Murphy, and Mark Howe with Nicholas Kronwall. In the net, we saw Dominic Hasek with the Buffalo Sabres. He will not be appearing for the Detroit Red Wings. No worries, they've got Terry Sawchuk to start for them, and Chris Osgood will be backing him up. I've had a little fun with the backup sometimes, maybe the backup goaltender, not necessarily who is second in wins or games played, maybe just someone that I personally like or I think is a cool story to have on the team. And I'm not sure where Osgood falls in here. Maybe there's other goaltenders who could have gone in instead, but I've gone with Osgood to back up Sawchuk here. As we'll move on, I talked about era splits earlier with the Blackhawks. We're going to see a big one here with the Edmonton Oilers. Modern-day Oilers are basically run by the 80s Oilers. They're going to put their skates back on and get out on the ice with a couple of those modern stars here in their all-time team. The tandem from the 80s, Grant Fuhr and Bill Ranford, will be the backstops in net. At the front, we've kept the big lines together. It's Wayne Gretzky with Esa Tikkanen and Jari Kurri. The current Oilers stars, Connor McDavid, Ryan Nugent-Hopkins, and Leon Draisaitl. Back to the 80s again for Messier, Simpson, and Anderson. And then a little late 90s, early 2000s action here with Doug Weight, Ryan Smith, and Ales Hemsky. The defense is where it's going to kind of drop off for the Oilers. We're going to have Charlie Huddy and Paul Coffey, Kevin Lowe and Steve Stais, Marty McSorley, and Jeff Bookeboom. Yeah, there's probably some better defensemen who could have gone in there. I had Jason Smith in mind. Oscar Klefbom could maybe even make an appearance here. Quite frankly, if there was a tie to be broken, the player who was already in the game got the win. And that's why we're going to see Stais especially in here. Keeping the 80s guys alive with McSorley and Bookeboom and Lowe, I think was all right. Maybe if I redid this team again, there might be a couple additions, but this is what we're going to go into it with here this time. As I move on to another big underdog. I said the Blue Jackets earlier maybe on paper one of the worst teams. The Panthers probably better, but they'll be in that big powerhouse Atlantic Division with 4 original 6 teams. The Buffalo Sabres already at the top of the pack. They're just going to be battling for those playoff spots, and the Panthers easily the worst team in that division, and probably just ahead of the Blue Jackets for the conference. But we'll take a look at their team anyway. They had a magical cup run in '96. They found a way to take down some heavy hitters in that year. We'll see if they can bring that energy in. They'll have a lot of guys from that team and some help as well. So take a look at the Florida Panthers. Sasha Barkov with Jonathan Huberdeau and Pavel Bure. Ole Jokinen, their franchise points leader, with Scott Mellenby and Nathan Horton. Vincent Trocheck with Stephen Weiss and Radek Dvorak. Nick Bjugstad with Rob Niedermeyer and Bill Lindsay. On defense, Ed Jovanovski with Robert Svela. Brian Campbell and Jay Bowmeister with Brian McCabe and Paul Laus. Goaltender here, probably no surprise. For Florida, it'll be Roberto Luongo. And with the backup, John Van Beesbrook. Moving on now to a 2-time Stanley Cup winner. Part of the original expansion of 67-68, the LA Kings will start from the net out. Jonathan Quick and Rogie Vachon will split the time here. I've got them equal in overall, so we'll see. It's Quick in the starter slot now. That'll probably get flipped around. Jonathan Quick and Rogie Vachon. Moving up to the front, the second and final appearance for Wayne Gretzky. He'll be in between Luc Robitaille and Zygmunt Palffy. Marcel Dion with Charlie Simmer and Dave Taylor, the Triple Crown line. Anze Kopitar and Dustin Brown have Bernie Nichols with them. Butch Goring, Mike Murphy, and Jim Fox. Lubomir Vishnowsky with Rob Blake, Steve Duchesne, Drew Doughty, Alec Martinez, and Matthias Nordstrom are the defense for the Kings. Moving on now. All right. So this is a created team. I mentioned the Thrashers earlier. There's a reason it has a created team. I'll get into that at the end of the video too. It's not a lot of fun if you don't particularly care about the background of making this all. But just for the sake of a couple technical needs, I've created a team and I've combined the Las Vegas Golden Knights and the Atlanta Thrashers. So it's going to be majority Knights because, let's be real, the Thrashers didn't have a whole lot of great players come through them and stick around long enough to make a team like this. So combining them with the Golden Knights, they'll get a couple extra players, especially at forward. But mostly it's the Vegas Golden Knights with a little help from Atlanta. William Karlsson with Danny Heatley and Ilya Kovalchuk. Ray Ferraro with Max Pacioretty and Jonathan Marchessault. Thomas Nosek with Vyacheslav Kozlov and Riley Smith. Cody Eakin with Pierre-Edouard Bellemare and Alex Tuck. On defense, it's all Vegas. Shea Theodore and Nate Schmidt. Braden McNabb and Colin Miller. John Merrill and Derek Englund. And probably no surprise, the starting goaltender Marc-Andre Fleury with Johan Hedberg coming in from the Atlanta Thrashers. Not the leader on anything for the Thrashers, but let's be real, I didn't want to create a Atlanta Thrashers goalie, so Hedberg gets the slot here. Moving on now to the Minnesota Wild, another newer expansion team from 2000-2001. They'll be over in the West, so I think they'll have a better shot at making some noise than the Blue Jackets and the Panthers in that era. They don't really have to deal with those big powerhouse original 6 teams, except for Chicago. So we'll see if they have a better chance here in the West. Starting from the net, they'll keep Devin Dubnyk, and they'll have Dwayne Rollison backing him up. Mikko Koivu with Marian Gaborik and Andrew Brunette. Michael Granlund with Zach Parise and Jason Pominville. Pierre-Marc Bouchard with Jason Zucker and Nino Niederreiter. Charlie Coyle with Wes Walls and Kyle Brodziak. On defense, Ryan Suter with Matt Dumba. Jonas Brodin and Jared Spurgeon. Nick Schultz and Marek Zidlicki. Mentioned them earlier. I think Detroit's probably the best team on paper, but the Montreal Canadiens are going to have something to say about that. They've got 23 Stanley Cups to their name, 25 NHL championships. They won a couple before the Stanley Cup was even a thing. That's how long these guys have been around. They're listed on Hockey Reference as being starting from 1917 to 1918. They've got history that predates the NHL. So they got a lot of great players coming up here for the Habs. There's probably some big names that I missed that I didn't realize were as important as maybe they are, but I have included some big ones that I knew were missing for sure. So here come the Habs. It'll be Armor Lock with Guy Lafleur and Rocket Richard. Jean Beliveau with Ivan Cormier and Bernie Boom Boom Jeffrion. Henri Shaw with Steve Shutt and Howie Morenz. Guy Carbonneau with Bob Gainey and Saku Koivu. On defense, Doug Harvey with Larry Robinson. Serge Savard with Butch Bouchard. Guy Lapointe and Patrice Brisebois. I've said already that Patrick Waugh wouldn't be a part of this team, but they've got some great goaltenders to slide into his slot anyway. Jacques Plante will get the start. Carey Price, who I believe just recently took the franchise lead for games played, gets the backup. There's a slot here that maybe should belong to Ken Dryden. I've gone with Jacques Plante instead. Again, maybe a little laziness for me on that one. Plante was already in the game. I would have had to create Dryden. I don't know if it would have made him any much better than Plante. He is already in the game here anyway. A big 94 overall for him. So a great slot and net here for the Habs. As we'll move on. This team, if you've looked at the alumni teams that EA put out, this was the one that needed a goalie the most. The New Jersey Devils, without Martin Brodeur. So I've added him in here. Marty Brodeur will get the start for the Devils, with Chris Terreri as his backup. Up front, Taylor Hall. Back when I was looking at the Oilers, I just about put Hall and Eberle on McDavid's wings. Couldn't decide if I was too much of a joke or what it was, so I just decided to put the modern guys in. And that little snub from Edmonton is what earns Taylor Hall his slot here in New Jersey. He's too good of a player to sort of leave off. And this New Jersey offense could really use him on here anyway. So I've got him in. He's got Jason Arnott at center with Claude Lemieux on the right side. Scott Gomez, Patrick Iliosh, and Brian Giunta reunite their line. Travis Zajac with Zach Parise and Jamie Langenbrunner. Bobby Holik with Kirk Muller and John McClain. Some big boys on defense for the New Jersey Devils. The top pair, Scott Niedermayer and Scott Stevens. Tommy Alboline and Brian Rafalski, Ken Danico, and the current captain, Andy Green. One big cup era to work with there for the Devils. And they date back a good long while, going back to the 74-75 season, going through all kinds of different names. They finally settle in New Jersey, get a Stanley Cup, 3 of them in fact. And here's sort of the team that gets that done. That 2000s dynasty really making their mark on this team. A couple new guys get added in, a couple of the older ones as well. With Brodeur in the net, this defense, and the addition of Taylor Hall on the offense, I think will give them a good shot in that Metro. That Metro division is going to be a lot of fun in the East. As I'll move out west to the next team, the Nashville Predators, another one of the newer expansion teams starting in 98-99. Their franchise leader, David Legwand, will be the top center for them, with Philip Forsberg and Alex Radulov on his wings. Mike Fisher with J.P. Dumont and Marty Erat. Greg Johnson, Scott Hartnell and Patrick Hornqvist. Vern Fiddler, Craig Smith, and Scott Walker. A great defense for the Predators. They've always drafted well back there. They got a couple guys back and a few to stay. Ryan Suter with Shea Weber. Roman Josi with Kimmo Timonen. Dan Hamhuis and Ryan Ellis. And in the net, they'll keep Pecorine, and he'll have some help from Chris Mason. Moving on now back to that Metro division I was talking about. We saw with the Oilers what their Stanley Cup dynasty was able to bring to that team. The New York Islanders are going to get a lot of their dynasty back around that same time back as well. Plus a captain who will sneak his way back on. Starting from the net, though, Billy Smith and Chico Resch. And at the front, Brian Trottier, Clark Gillies, and Mike Bossy. Pat LaFontaine with Kyle Okposo and the return of the former captain, John Tavares. Brent Sutter, Derek King, and Pat Flatley. Bob Bourne, John Tonelli, and Bobby Nystrom. Dennis Potvin with Ken Morrow, Kenny Johnson, Travis Hamonic, Thomas Hickey, and Jean Potvin are the defense. We'll stay in the Metro Division. We'll stay in New York for the next team. I know the original 6-1 coming up, the New York Rangers. 4 Stanley Cups to their name. You're probably going to notice with the Rangers right away, especially if you're somebody who grew up watching hockey around the same time I did. Maybe a lot of the big names that you associate with the Rangers don't make it to this team because they weren't there long enough. I'm thinking of Lindros and Yager, Bure, Theo Fleury, guys like that, who came in on some big contracts, stuck around for a couple years, unfortunately didn't get the job done and moved on. They don't make it on this team, but they're going to have some big names for them as well. Jean Rattel with Vic Hadfield and Rod Gilbert. Mark Messier with Adam Graves and Mike Gartner. Andy Bathgate with Steve Vickers and Dean Prentice. Walt Tkachuk with Don Maloney and Bob Nevin. If you're wondering the order here, you're noticing that the overalls are going up as I'm moving down the line. I wanted to keep this big line together. This is a famous line for the Rangers. I forget what it's called right now. Maybe I should have made note of that. But anyway, that's a big line I wanted to keep together. Adam Graves and Mark Messier played a lot together. I wanted to keep them. So Bathgate, unfortunately, sort of slid down the lineup just to keep a couple things together. But he'll get a lot of time on the power play and such anyway, so it should work out fine for them. As we'll check out the defense, it'll be Brian Leach with Brad Park, Harry Howell with Ron Greshner, Mark Stahl and Jeff Bookeboom. In the net, King Henrik Lundqvist gets the start, with Stanley Cup champion Mike Richter backing him up. Moving out of the Metro just for a second to visit the Ottawa Senators. If you looked at the original alumni teams on this game, this was the one that was missing the most. The Senators alumni team on here, there was just no one. There was just no one who needed to be on this team. You missed a lot of them because some of them may be still playing. You missed a lot of them because they just haven't been out of the league long enough to join the Alumni Association, etc. Maybe not able to get the licensing for them. So I've made a lot of players for the Senators, and they look a little bit more complete. We'll start from the net out. I couldn't make stuff up. The goaltending position is not going to be fantastic. They'll keep Craig Anderson, but the starter will be Patrick Lalime. And if you're a Leaf fan like I am, you're a big fan of Patrick Lalime, because he really enjoyed giving up goals to the Leafs in the playoffs. But other than that, a fantastic goaltender. Well, fantastic, maybe stretching it. A great goaltender for the Senators. Has a couple of their records hanging out there. I think Anderson's been sticking around long enough to sort of beat him, but I think Lalime gets the nod over him. His number's a little better, so he'll get the nod over Anderson. They get a lot of guys back here on forward. This is going to be a formidable team, especially for how recent they are. They're going to have a lot of names up here. Jason Spezza with Danny Heatley and Daniel Alfredson. Alexei Yashin with Marty Havlat and Marian Hossa. Mike Fisher with Sean McEachern and Mark Stone. Radek Bonk, Magnus Arvidsson, and Chris Neal. On defense, what a top pairing this is going to be. Zdeno Chara and Erik Karlsson with Wade Redden and Anton Volchenkov. Chris Phillips and Mark Borowiecki. Back to the Metro we go for the Philadelphia Flyers. Eric Lindros with John LeClaire and Mark Recchi. Couldn't quite find a spot for Michael Renberg here to complete the Legion of Doom line, but I think a good replacement for Mark Recchi. Claude Giroux with Simon Gagne and Tim Kerr. A line dating back to the Broad Street Bullies with Bobby Clark, Bill Barber, and Reggie Leach. Rod Brindamore with Brian Propp and Gary Dornhofer. On defense, Mark Howe with Eric Desjardins, Jimmy Watson and Chris Therien, Joe Watson and Doug Crosman. In net, Bernie Parent and Ron Hextall. Sticking in the Metro, sticking in Pennsylvania, we'll head out to see the Pittsburgh Penguins. This is going to be pretty comparable to the Oilers, I believe. Some huge names up front. Maybe a little less so on defense, but I think Pittsburgh's defense, you're going to agree, is better. In net, doing pretty all right back there, too. We'll take a look. No shock here. Mario Lemieux with Ron Francis and Jaromir Jagr. Sidney Crosby, Evgeny Malkin, and Joe Mullen. Marty Straka with Kevin Stevens and Alex Kovalev. Sil Apps Jr. with Rick Kehoe and Jean Pronovost. On defense, just like the Oilers, they'll be led by Paul Coffey, but he's got Larry Murphy, Darius Kasparaitis, Chris Letang, Brooks Orpik, and Ron Stackhouse in behind him on that blue line. In net, a couple Stanley Cup champions for the Penguins, Tom Barrasso and Marc-Andre Fleury. Fleury, the starter for Vegas. He'll get the backup job here for the Penguins. Hard to make this Penguins team and not include Fleury. I thought about throwing Matt Murray in there, just for giggles. But Fleury gets the spot there. Barrasso will get the start, though. Moving on now. Back out west we go. Just a couple teams left to go through. This one, the San Jose Sharks. We'll start from the net. It'll be Evgeny Nabokov with Vesa Toskala as the backup. Joe Thornton with Patrick Marleau and Joe Pavelski. Vincent Domfus with Tomas Hertl and Owen Nolan. Logan Couture with Ryan Clough and Jonathan Cheechoo. Mike Ricci with Marco Sturm and Jeff Friesen. On defense, Marc-Edouard Vlasic and Brent Burns. Mike Rathje and Dan Boyle. Scott Hannon and Justin Braun. The reigning Stanley Cup champions come up next. The St. Louis Blues, Pierre Turgeon, Pavel Demitra, and Brett Hull. Bernie Fedorko, Keith Tkachuk, and Vladimir Tarasenko. David Backes, Alex Steen, and Joe Mullen. Gary Younger, Brian Sutter, and Red Berenson. On defense, one of my favorite deep pairings growing up, Chris Pronger and Al McInnes. Barrett Jackman, Alex Pietrangelo, Bob and Barclay Plager. In net, one of my favorite goaltenders as well, but not for this team. It's going to be a shame to see him in blue and not playing for the team I wanted to play for, but he slots in here as the starter. Cujo, Curtis Joseph gets the start for the St. Louis Blues, with Michael Lute as his backup. And is anybody else's game doing this? Why is Wilf Paymont the picture for this guy? He was in the game already. I haven't added him in. And for whatever reason, if you go into him, he's got his Jason mask that he should have on, and everything's working out. But his picture is just of Wilf Paymont for some reason, of the Toronto Maple Leafs, the other 99. Anyway, as long as it's not a forward and net, we're all good. As we move on now to the Tampa Bay Lightning. Nick Habibulin and Ben Bishop will get the goaltending slot here. If you're wondering on this one, I believe it was TSN's Bardown who got Marty St. Louis to make his all-time Lightning team. I haven't quite totally copied what St. Louis did. I believe he had Braden Point on that team. I haven't thrown him in yet. There's a replacement for him. I forget who I used to replace him. But and another one that had people talking about when he put that out was Ben Bishop over Andrei Vasilevsky. I've agreed with St. Louis on that one. We're putting Bishop in there. To the front end, Steven Stamkos with Dave Andreychuk and Nikita Kucherov. Vincent Lecavalier with Vinny Prospal and Marty St. Louis. Brad Richards with Brian Bradley and Tyler Johnson. Tim Taylor with Freddie Modine and Rob Zaminer. On defense, Victor Hedman, Dan Boyle. Roman Hamrlik and Pavel Kubina with Jason Collimore and Corey Sarich. Now moving on to our final original six team. I am a Leaf fan, so I had a little bit of fun with Toronto here. There's some names who should be on here that I haven't included, and there's some names that maybe shouldn't be that I have. I've especially taken the top line and sort of made it my own. We'll see that when we flip over here, but they're my team. I wanted to put my mark on them. So here come the Toronto Maple Leafs. It'll be Matt Sundin with Austin Matthews and Phil Kessel. Through Sundin's entire time as a Leaf, everybody was just waiting for a winger to come in and just tear it up with him. They kind of got that a little bit with Alex McGillney, but he was past his prime. Always looking for that winger for Sundin. He moves on to Vancouver, which we're not going to talk about, and retires. Phil Kessel is sort of the next era for Toronto, and his entire time, they're looking for a center. So I'm having them solve each other's problems here on the top line. Sundin gets his winger in Kessel. Kessel gets his center with Sundin. And Austin Matthews, hey, yeah, he's on this line too. He's going to hang out on the left wing side. Daryl Sittler and Lanny McDonald are together. They've got Frank Mahovlich with them. Teeter Kennedy with Dave Keon and George Armstrong. Doug Gilmour and Wendell Clark will play with the first ever 50-goal scorer for the Toronto Maple Leafs, Rick Vive. On defense, it's the Leafs. The defense is going to fall downhill. I've maybe made it a little worse too, but here we go. Borja Salming with Ian Turnbull, Morgan Riley and Tim Horton, Thomas Caberlet and Brian McCabe. I think Caberlet makes this team outright. I couldn't include Caberlet without including McCabe. I had to put that pairing back together. It was just too much, honestly. There's probably some defensemen that I'm missing out on here that could have made this team better, but I had to put Caberlet and McCabe together. As we move into the net, I couldn't totally ruin them and give them Joseph. Joseph's great, but these guys are better. It's Johnny Bauer and Walter Turk Rhoda. Staying in Canada for a little while here, we'll head out west, though, to the Vancouver Canucks. The Sedin twins, Henrik and Daniel, will get to play alongside Pavel Bure. Brendan Morrison with Marcus Naslund and Alexander Mogilny. Thomas Gradin with Tony Tonti and Stan Smeel. Ryan Kessler with Trevor Linden and Todd Bertuzzi. On defense, Alex Edler with Kevin Bieksa. Jerke Lume and Matthias Olin. Harold Sneps and Sammy Salo. In net, this is the only goaltender who will be the starter for two teams. We saw him already in Florida. Roberto Luongo, the former captain of the Vancouver Canucks, will get the start here with Kirk McLean backing him up. Now the Winnipeg Jets. So I've told you already, they will get the old Jets. They will get the new Jets. They don't get the middle there of the Atlanta Thrashers. We've put them together with Vegas. So this is going to actually be a good little 50-50 of some modern Jets and some old Jets. We'll see that in net. The starter, Connor Hellebuck and Bob Essenza. Or Essenza. I've always said Essenza, but I've recently heard Essenza, and I think that's correct. I don't know. I'm probably going to say Essenza. Taking a look at the forward lines here. I said it was pretty much 50-50. We see it through the forward lines. The top one, the old Jets, Dale Howardchuk with Keith Tkachuk and Teemu Selanne. A modern line of Scheifele, Laine, and Wheeler. Throwing it back once more for Eddie Olczyk, Thomas Steen, and Paul McLean. And a little mix-up here of Brian Little, Morris Lukowicz, and Nikolai Ehlers. On defense, former James Norris Trophy winner Randy Carlyle with Justin Bufflin, Dave Babich, Frederick Olofsson, Toby Enstrom, and Dave Ellett round out the Winnipeg Jets. One team to go. Finally got their first Stanley Cup a couple of seasons ago. They'll finish us off here as the Washington Capitals. Alexander Ovechkin and Nicholas Backstrom. They'll have Peter Bondra on their wing now. Adam Oates, he's on a couple of these teams. He makes another one here with Dennis Maroop and Mike Gartner. Mike Ridley with Steve Konowalchuk and Ben Aki Gustafsson. Dale Hunter with Kelly Miller and Michael Pavanka. On defense, Sergei Gonchar and John Carlson, Rod Langway and Larry Murphy, Al Iafrate and Callie Johansson. And in the net, they'll keep Stanley Cup champion Braden Holtby, and they'll add in, to back him up, Olaf Kolzig. So that's everybody. Like I said, I'm sure there's some players I'm missing. I'm sure there's some who shouldn't be on these teams that I have included, but I was having some fun with it. I've gone through all 31 franchises, I suppose, with the weird Atlanta mix-up. But 32 franchises, let's say then. And through all that, this is what I've come up with. So hopefully it works out. If you stuck around for all this, thank you. I am going to go a little bit into how I've messed with the overalls and what I've sort of done here. But I figured we'd get the roster reveal out. If you want to bail now, certainly feel free. But I'm going to nerd out a little bit here. So how I've sort of put this all together. If you've picked up the original game and you've seen the alumni teams, you'll notice a lot of overall discrepancies here. A lot of guys, some guys I've moved up, some guys I've moved down. I've sort of done that all through Hockey References era-adjusted points metric. I've done that. I've gone points per game with the forwards, and through that come up with a system of how to translate that into in-game overalls. So my rule of thumb was sort of 90 overall is 1 point per game, one era-adjusted point per game. So Matt Sundin sitting at 1.05 points per game. Once you error adjust, I believe it was. He actually ends up gaining a couple points. If you just took his base level, I think he's pretty much exactly at a point per game. He played something like 987 games and got like 986 points or something like that. He's like right on point per game. The error adjusting gives him a little bit more just because he played a good amount of his career during a time where goals were not easy to come by. Whereas you go to Montreal and see a guy like Guy Lafleur, he lost a bit of points. So did Wayne Gretzky. Wayne Gretzky ended up losing like 400 points or something through error adjusting. Still breaking my scale. He had just, with the math I came up with, he would end up having to be like 106 overall or something if it fits. So we just made him as good as we could. But that's sort of how I came up with that for the forwards. Defense, a little harder because I couldn't rely totally on points. If they were already in the game, I've probably just stuck with their overall. Unless they're a multi-time James Norris winner and for whatever reason the game had them marked low, which I think maybe happened with one player. I couldn't tell you who right now. I didn't touch it. So the defense is pretty much as is. As for the ones that I created myself, that's sort of how I balanced it. If they had points, that was helpful. If they didn't, I sort of gave them the benefit of the doubt and assumed they were good at defense. If you're making an all-time team, if you're in the Hall of Fame, if you've got some clout to you, I'm assuming you were good at something. And if you got no points and you're a defenseman, I'm assuming you were good at defense. So I boosted up their defensive stats and sort of landed right around where the overalls were. If you got a Norris, I think that pretty much guaranteed an 85 overall. If you've got no trophies to speak of, you sort of stayed under that. If you got a bunch, you're up in the 990 conversation. If you got a heart, that throws you way up there too. So it's probably not a perfect system, but it's what I sort of worked with. Same thing with the goaltenders. If you got a big bunch of wins with that team, I assume you were good, unless I know otherwise. If you get some individual awards to your name, if you've got Stanley Cups, if you've got the Hall of Fame, that gives you big numbers. Same thing here. I've pretty much, they were in the game already, pretty much kept their overalls the same. Let EA do the hard work for me on that one. I don't think there's really anybody I messed with too much there. I think Patrick Waugh, I boosted him up because I wanted those really high 90s for Hasek, Brodeur, and Waugh. And if I was giving Hasek and Brodeur high numbers, I needed Waugh to be up there too. So I sort of played around with that. I think I gave Sawchuk a little boost. Plante, I think I might have gave a little boost. I can't remember. But that's sort of what got done there. And why does the Vegas-Atlanta team exist? It would have been just as easy to throw in the Vegas team, right? Not quite. I needed, where I was creating players, especially it was Pavel Bure and Roberto Luongo. Ironically, needing to be on both Florida and Vancouver. I needed to create them and then copy them. I could have just made them twice. I wanted them to be perfect copies, so that way they would react the same way both ways. And in order to do that, I needed to create the player, put them on a team, create a team, pick them off of that created team so I could have two, put them into the season mode, and then trade them from the Las Vegas Golden Thrashers of Atlanta onto their proper team. I had to do that as well with Joe Thornton, who's already in this game, but only once. He wasn't on any alumni teams. He wasn't on any of the international teams, so he's only there once. I could only put him on Boston or San Jose. He deserved to be on both. I put him on the Vegas Golden Thrashers and traded him over to Boston. So that sort of worked out there, and it gave me an excuse to include Ilya Kovalchuk, who I maybe could have thrown on the Devils, but his numbers didn't really line up there too great. He is the franchise leader for the modern-day Winnipeg Jets because they are, as much as the NHL doesn't want to say it, merged with the Atlanta Thrashers, and he's still the franchise leader over there. So I needed to find a way to put him on a team. I didn't build an entire team just to include Ilya Kovalchuk. I'm not that much of an Ilya Kovalchuk fan, but it was a good excuse to sort of kill two birds there. So that gives us Kovalchuk and Heatley and Ferraro and Kozlov on the Vegas Golden Knights. Other than that, I think that's pretty much it. So next up, I'm going to start recording some games and try to get those out. I'd like to see every team in action. I've got a little tentative idea of what games I want to show. And what I'll probably do is about one a week, one per in-game week. Maybe make it the Saturday night games. Pick whatever game looks the most fun there and plug it in. If it's a rivalry game, great. If it's two teams who are about the same skill-wise, great. I'm probably not going to show any Detroit Red Wing versus Florida Panthers games unless it's later on in the season and we need those for playoff implications. That doesn't sound like a lot of fun. I don't want to watch an 11-0 slaughter. If it goes the other way, it'd be great, but we'll see what happens as the season progresses. If the Panthers are doing well, for example, I'll show them against some good teams. But if they're just getting murdered, there's not going to be much point. So we'll get that out. I'll hope to do that about every day or so, but I'm not getting anything out of this, so I won't guarantee that. But that'll be the plan, and we'll see what gets done here. This is done the same way as the modern NHL as far as the season is concerned. So everybody's in their correct divisions. The playoff system will work the same. I did think about breaking up, especially the Atlantic, because it has so many original 6 teams in it. I thought about breaking that up, maybe dispersing, maybe putting the Red Wings back into the Royal Division in the West. Maybe that would help out a little bit, but it felt, once I started doing that, I would have had to rearrange everything, and it didn't really make a lot of sense. So I just stuck with the original, with the current NHL divisions, and we've gone with that. So we've got a 31-team season, all ready to go. We're going to simulate that and see who, out of all these all-time Legends teams, can end up winning the ultimate Stanley Cup, I suppose. The Legends Stanley Cup. I don't know. I feel like we should come up with we should take the Stanley Cup, double it in size, and paint it gold or something. I don't know. Anyway, so that's that. Thanks for hanging around if you did. And we'll get a game up soon.